There's no clock, folks, so this meeting could go on forever. Okay. Thanks. We have less than a minute left.
Hey, I was watching the time.
Oh, I've got lost in the building, so I don't know. Lost service. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to call today's committee of the whole meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. The American flag is over here to my right, your left, and then after that, will be followed by a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on our agenda, we have, and just for my colleagues to know that if you wish to speak, that there's a button on the microphone. When the light is green, that means it's on, it's hot. If it's not green, it's off. Next on our agenda is public comment. For folks from the public who wish to speak, we have a microphone right up here in front. You'll have 3 minutes. We do have a sign-in, I believe, on the table in the back or on the one of the two in the back in the hallway on the way up. So is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak today? Okay, seeing none, moves us on to the rest of our agenda. First off, under Educational and Student Services, we have an expulsion review. We'll have Ms. Zumagala, our Assistant Superintendent, and our Solicitor, Jennifer Cornell, who's going to be providing a presentation and information. But I want to kick it off first that many of us at different times, we've talked about the need for arriving at, and the administration has asked for us as well to arrive at essentially a board philosophy or a board agreement around what we believe the expulsion process should look like. And by addressing this today in this presentation, we'll receive information about what legally we can do. And it's also in a handout that you have, what legally we can do, what legally we can't, basically, what statutes limit us to. And I just want to lay this out. I think I sent this out in email, and I know I sent out several emails, and Angela sent out several emails on my behalf. So I wholly understand if you haven't got to it yet. But this is at the request of board members and of the administration that we would go through this process. My thinking is that this meeting and next meeting is sort of is a fact-finding. There's going to be some fact-finding at both of these where we can learn about how things are working with expulsions, but also some potential as far as other considerations. My goal is that today, and I'm going to be taking notes, and hopefully I'll get notes from others, today we can begin to collect information that would shape a statement of philosophy that I will draft with the administration and present to everybody next month. A statement of philosophy that would basically comprise the board's philosophy and concepts about what we believe the expulsion process should look like. Essentially the goals and the guardrails, the goals of what we think it should be like and the guardrails of what it should not be like. And then if we come to agreement on a draft in February, which again, we'll have another educational session. Amy Blackman from the CBC is here. She'll be presenting next month as well. We may have other presenters as well. then hopefully we come to an agreement, we're able to pass this statement of philosophy, we vote on it, and pass it next month, or March, in March. And then, by having that statement of philosophy and having gone through these educational aspects of this meeting and next meeting, then that would shape the ability for the policy committee to be able to make revisions to the policies in collaboration with the administration within and under what our statement of philosophy says. So basically that becomes our guiding document for that, and it will give clear direction to the administration and to the board. And so as things come, that becomes our foundational document around it. And then we can evaluate whether the expulsion process is meeting our expectations by referring and evaluating it under the lens of that statement. Brian was just noting to me earlier that this layout doesn't necessarily work too well with a committee of the whole meeting because we're all staring face forward and stuff. So, but feel free to turn your head if you can and to talk amongst each other. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Umabala and Ms. Ornell to talk about what we have. So.
Thank you, Dr. Brennan. As Dr. Brennan mentioned, you have a document in front of you titled Erie's Public Schools Student Discipline and Expulsion Process Overview. We'll be doing an overview tonight from the legal lens, and then after Attorney Ornell is finished with that, I will go over what some of our internal processes are, and we can take questions at the end. Attorney Ornell.
So thank you. So as Dr. Brenneman stated, the purpose of this outline and what we're talking about tonight is to highlight for the board what areas of the law dictate student discipline and expulsion process requirements and what it doesn't. Like where the board has some flexibility and autonomy to use its authority to decide how you want that process to look and what rules you want to apply to the students of the Erie School District. So I'm putting this together, Ms. Zumagala and I, the portions that are italicized and in blue, that's the part where those are the items where the board has more flexibility or more autonomy. And the non-italicized portions are really what are dictated by the law, either federal law, Pennsylvania law, or in the Erie School District's case, a court order that we'll talk about. So both the United States Supreme Court and the Pennsylvania Public School Code, which is a statute, prescribe due process rights that students have in public schools in Pennsylvania. And those rights really are distilled in the Pennsylvania Department of Education regulations. And that's where a lot of the framework is that we work under when we are doing working under the expulsion process. So first, school districts are required to send written notice to parents and students whenever a student is suspended from school. And internally that's referred to as an OSS notice. Excuse me. There are specific topics and rights that have to be addressed in that letter that's prescribed by the regulations. However, certainly the school board, committee of the board, the administration has input or can modify the actual language used if you want to make it softer or maybe more understandable or change the tone of it, or you do have input as to how those rights, those concepts are communicated to the parents and the students. Secondly, school districts are required to give the parents and students an opportunity to have what's called or referred to in the regulations as an informal hearing whenever a student, and that's at the building level, not at the board level, so that's at the building level in front of building level administration, whenever a student's suspended for more than 3 days. And again, the due process rights associated with that informal hearing and what we communicate to the students and their parents about those rights with regard to that hearing is dictated by the regulations. But again, the actual language of how we communicate that to them is something that the board would have input on. Third, school districts are not allowed to suspend students for longer than 10 consecutive school days unless agreed to by the parents. And this requirement, you cannot modify that. We might think that it's appropriate in some circumstances to suspend students for longer, but you cannot modify that unless the parents agree to that extension. Or you'll see
by definition, under Pennsylvania law, suspension beyond consecutive school days constitutes an expulsion. And expulsion carries with it other associated due process rights, such as students are afforded the right to have a hearing prior to being expelled. So by definition, like 11 consecutive days of suspension without an expulsion hearing would be an expulsion. It's not a suspension any longer. One exception to the 10 consecutive day rule is that the school district can suspend a student for pending expulsion for 15 consecutive school days if it is determined by the school district at that informal hearing that returning the students to their normal class would constitute a threat to the health, safety, or welfare of others. So it's important for the board to note, the administration currently does utilize that extra 5 days of suspension sometimes if for logistic reasons or scheduling reasons, it's impossible for us to get the expulsion hearing scheduled within those first 10 days. So we do utilize that, but it's important for the board to note that PDE gives the school board the ability to direct the administration not to utilize those extra 5 days. So that's up to you. It's something you can talk about when you're working on your statement of philosophy and potential policy changes moving forward. So as I stated, students are entitled to a formal hearing prior to being expelled. And if that hearing does not occur within the 10 days or the 15 days, if you have the informal hearing and you make that determination about health and safety, the school district is required to return the student back to school until you have that expulsion hearing, or unless the parent agrees. Sometimes the parents request that the suspension be extended if the parents want the expulsion hearing to be postponed or rescheduled for some reason. But unless the parents agree to it, the school district, we are required to return the students to school. And that's why sometimes if the hearing is getting pushed off, we're seeing students returning to school. Also, another reason why sometimes we see students return to school prior to the board making an ultimate decision after an expulsion hearing is if the student has previously been identified under federal law as a student, a special education student, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And I'll explain that in more detail down below. But usually the school district will return special ed students back to their school after 3 suspension days, because there are so many days that the school district has to suspend a special education student in the course of any given school year. And then finally, what's important, and this is specific only to the Erie School District, most school districts, large school districts especially, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, they place students in alternative education programs or ALDED programs in that interim period from when the student is first suspended until the end of the expulsion process, when the school board actually takes action after the expulsion hearing. Erie's Public Schools is unable to do this because you are subject to a court order that we refer to as the Jordan Order that was established back in the early 70s that I will explain, in more detail below. When a student is referred for expulsion, again, Pennsylvania Department of Education regulations require school districts to send a second written notice. That's not something that we can not do. You're required to do that. And there are very specific rights that a student has associated with that expulsion hearing, which the school district has an affirmative obligation to outline in that expulsion hearing notice letter. But again, where the board's discretion comes in is we can talk about how we communicate or articulate those rights to the parents and the students in that letter. Finally, the state law, the Department of Ed regulations allow that expulsion hearing to be held before the full school board, before a committee of the school board, which is historically how the Erie School District has done it, or before a qualified hearing examiner appointed by the board. So any of those 3 options are authorized by Pennsylvania law.
Can we ask some questions?
Sure.
What's going on? So does 4 happen before 5?
Does,
Number 4 happen before number 5?
yes,
It does. So they have a hearing before they're expelled,
correct.
but then they also can hold another expulsion hearing before the full board? Is this a different hearing? than the one in number 4?
No, it's the same hearing. They're entitled to a formal hearing prior to being expelled, and then number 5 is talking about the requirements associated with that expulsion hearing.
So they're notified that they're being expelled before the hearing.
Well, they're notified that they're being referred for expulsion
Referred.
if they have a
Okay,
right
so
to an
actually this
hearing.
number 5A happens before the hearing. Is that?
Yes,
Trying to
yes,
get this
yep.
correct. Okay, so this actually happens up here. Okay. All right, thank you.
So that's Pennsylvania, and so there's a lot of specificity with that we're not getting into tonight, but that's the Pennsylvania Department of Education requirements. And there's 2 other laws or court orders that impact this analysis, and that is the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is creates the rights for students with special needs. School districts are prohibited from expelling special education students when the behavior for which they were being expelled or for which they're being referred for expulsion is deemed to be a manifestation of their disability. And what that means is there's an analysis that's done by the students, members of the student's IEP team, including their parents. So it's not just a unilateral decision made by the district administration. It's relevant members of the student's IEP team, and they do an analysis as to whether the behavior at issue was caused by or had a direct and substantial relationship to the student's identified disability. So if it is, the district cannot discipline the student for those behaviors. There are 3 exceptions to that under federal law. That is if the student possessed a dangerous weapon, as that's defined under federal law, or possessed a controlled substance or an illegal drug, or has inflicted, that's past tense, serious bodily injury on another individual at school-sponsored events, or on district-provided transportation. So it's not necessarily they do any of those things outside in the community that has no nexus to school, but if there's a nexus to school, there are those 3 exceptions. Note, however, that even if one of those exceptions applies in the Erie School District, this Jordan court order is still applicable. And that is something that is that's unique only to the Erie School District. Note also that the manifestation determination meeting is, and that conclusion is reached or conducted prior to a referral for expulsion, because we cannot expel a student for, we have to make that determination before we know that a student can be expelled under federal law. And that, again, is often why special ed students are returned after at least, 3 days, so that we have time for the IEP team to convene and make that determination. And then finally, there's this concept of the Jordan order. And the Jordan order occurred, it's a consent decree that was entered in federal court in Erie County all the way back in 1974. And it flows from the teachers' collective bargaining agreement this language is still in the teachers' collective bargaining agreement that gives teachers the unilateral authority to remove students from their classroom if they believe those students are disruptive or constitute a threat. And a group of students brought a lawsuit against the school district stating that it was inappropriate for the teachers to have that unilateral power. It never went to, the court never decided it, and the litigants ended up entering into this consent decree, and it was approved by the judge. And that consent decree requires Erie's public schools to provide students who are laterally removed from the regular classroom for disciplinary reasons to an alternative education setting. So they're not expelled, but they're referred to what we call now alt ed. And that there is a 2-tiered hearing process that we refer to as a level 1, level 2 hearing process that, unless waived by the parents, students have that right to access when the district is referring a student to alt ed. And so that sort of preempts the collective bargaining agreement language so that students have these due process rights, even though teachers under their collective bargaining agreement have that right to request their removal from their
Attorney Garnell, so
their
just to
classroom.
clarify that it is still in the CBA to this day.
Correct.
It's just rendered moot because of the Jordan order.
the teachers still have a right, to remove the students, but before they can effectuate that right, this level 1, level 2 process, it has to be offered to the students.
Okay.
So yes, that language is still in the collective bargaining agreement. So this is very unique, and it comes into play because, as I stated, a lot of bigger school districts, in that interim time period from when a student is initially suspended and is referred for expulsion, we have the hearing, and then the board ultimately has to approve the expulsion at a meeting. Most bigger school districts will refer students to alternative education in that interim time period because 10 or 15 days, very hard to do that. But in the Erie School District, we are also dealing with the Jordan Order, and that does impact your flexibility. So Roman numeral 2 of your outline, this is areas of additional flexibility where the board has a lot more unilateral autonomy in determining or impacting when or why or the timeline of student expulsions. And so the first area of flexibility is that you are charged with defining the student code in the student code of conduct, the infractions which are applicable to students when they're at school, at school-sponsored events or on transportation. So you generally have the authority over how to define those infractions in the code of conduct with certain exceptions. And I didn't list them all, but just to give you an idea of what I mean when I say that sometimes you don't have pure autonomy. Bullying, you're required to have a bullying policy under the Pennsylvania Public School Code, and the school code defines what bullying is. Similarly, Pennsylvania law requires you to prohibit hazing. Pennsylvania law defines what hazing is. Federal harassment and discrimination laws, such as Title IX or Title VI, they have specific definitions as to what sex-based harassment is. So, so there are certain areas or definitions that are imposed upon you. And another important concept is there's also always a constitutional overlay. So sometimes there might be First Amendment, freedom of expression or freedom of association rights that students have that could be impacted depending on how you define certain code of conduct infractions. So that's something else that is impacted and you'll have to take into account when you are drafting the code of conduct.
Attorney Garland, I just want to note for the board at that point that while we're addressing the statement of philosophy this month, next month, again, hopefully adoption in March, and we'll be addressing possibly at the policy committee meetings in March, the policies that are associated with expulsions after we have, in light of the statement of philosophy. April probably at the earliest is when the opportunity to work on the student conduct, which we have to approve every year anyways, as part and with the handbook and everything. So just know that it's okay to have questions about the student conduct today as we're being presented, et cetera. But just note that the student code of conduct, et cetera, is something that we'll be getting to essentially after March. But go ahead, Ms. Cornwell.
Thank you, Dr. Brenneman. Also, it's important for the board to understand that sometimes it's possible that the teachers union has the right to have some input into some of these definitions or how we're prescribing or dealing with student code of conduct infractions or issues.
And can you describe what that means? Because that's a work environment. What essentially shapes that they have a say in it, and what does that look like?
Take that, Teresa.
We would look at the possibility of a change in work conditions. So we would have to have conversation with the EEA leadership on how we move forward with who we would include in that decision making.
Thank you.
The second major area of influence that the board has over this process is determining when certain code of conduct infractions result in a referral for expulsion. With certain exceptions. The major exception that comes to mind is the school code says if a student violates the weapons policy, they shall be expelled from the district for a period of not less than 1 year. But it also says the superintendent can recommend a lesser penalty on a case-by-case basis, and then that's ultimately approved by the board. So there are certain times that flexibility is taken from the board, but for the most part, it's the board who determines which student code of conduct infractions automatically or do or should or may get referred to the board for expulsion. And Ms. Umagala is going to talk about, at least historically or currently, what that practice is now. the other exceptions to that, to your autonomy in determining what or when students, certain conduct infractions trigger expulsion referrals, again, as we just discussed, IDEA, the special education restrictions, and then sometimes other federal laws, Title IX implications, for example. If there's a Title IX grievance procedure that's gone through and the Title IX decision maker recommends certain consequences, school boards have to take note of that. They can't just completely ignore that whole process when they're deciding consequences from those types of so there's an interplay, at least, with that federal law and when students might be brought forward for expulsion. Another area of flexibility is, and this is an important one, it's subtle, but when student victims and or student witnesses are required or brought before the school board or to testify at expulsion hearings. Historically, at least for the past 10 or 15 years, the administration has had a practice of avoiding calling student victims and student witnesses at expulsion hearings if at all possible. And the reason for that is 15 years ago, the administration was aware that some student victims testified against the accused, and then they were retaliated against after the hearing, out in the community, in the neighborhood. And we wanted to avoid that at all costs if we can. So we try to, bring cases forward that we can rely on adult witnesses, so we don't put the students in a possibly dangerous or retaliatory situation. Similarly, always bringing the victim, or we're very conscientious about requiring the victims to come forward and testify to the effects that this has had on them, the accused behavior has had on them, because we don't want to re-traumatize them or force them to be, upset by having to testify or sit in the room and talk about it again in front of a bunch of adults. So that said, that process is something that the board has input on as to how much of that victim voice, you want to hear at those expulsion hearings. So that is certainly something that the board can and should have input on. And then finally, I alluded to this earlier, whether expulsion hearings are held before the entire board, the committee of the whole, or an appointed committee of the board, or an appointed hearing officer, which does not have to be a board member, although the latter two do have to be ratified or ultimately approved by the school board, as you know. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Zumagala.
I have a question on one of the procedures here. On number 5A, it says, this is expulsion. Send the second written notification of the charges. What was the first written notification?
The out-of-school suspension notice.
So is there always, a suspension always comes before an expulsion? Okay.
I mean, unless you don't suspend the student and the student remains in school, every day up until the expulsion hearing happens. So, a suspension notice is only sent if we're not allowing the student to return to school. The expulsion notice is sent if they have been referred for expulsion.
Okay, so they may not get a first note. I mean, this may be the first notice they see.
If they're
of
not
the expulsion.
suspended, they would not, exactly.
Okay, so
I don't think it's ever happened, but
Okay.
it's possible.
Okay,
if
but
they're,
it's usually suspension and then expulsion.
yep.
Okay.
Great. So I'm going to move on just to a very brief overview of our internal process. So the next packet of documents I have, I just pulled out the section 15 of the Student Code of Conduct. This is from the student handbook and student code of conduct book. Just to show the board what levels we have for infractions. So it's this document here. And what you'll see is what currently are level 1 infractions, which are those of a less serious nature. When we get to level 2 infractions, those can rise to the expulsion level. And then if you look at the second page, which is actually page 50, the level 3 infractions, I want to bring attention to these because when a level 3 infraction happens, the building administration is required to refer the situation or the student for expulsion. And then it is viewed by, all expulsions are viewed by a district committee, which I will take you to the next document, which is the workflow. So all of those infractions are items that we as a committee, you as a board, and working together can address moving forward if we'd like to make any changes. Ms.
Do
Graff?
the level ones mean suspension, or may or may not be suspension?
It may or may not be suspension. Ms. Graff, if you look at the entire book, in the
Sure.
back, there are some definitions, and there's also what the possible consequences could be. It could simply be just a conference with an administrator. It could also be a teacher detention.
And these are good questions, Ms. Graff. I appreciate you asking them, so.
So looking at the workflow document, I just want to walk the board through how we handle this internally. So the incident happens in the schools, and the request for student expulsion hearing cover sheet is submitted to my office, to Ms. Slocum, and any other, if it's a student with an IEP, we would have the special education department. A student that is EL would go to Ms. Fiorelli as well. We also ask the administrators within 3 days to submit all of the investigation notes and evidence, and the expulsion committee reviews it from there. That's a district committee. So I'm at the top right here. So the expulsion committee review, and we have a schedule since we are on a time frame, and I just want to briefly walk the board through that. So on Fridays, the committee meets weekly to review the cases that have been presented throughout the whole week. They make a decision as to whether or not to move the expulsion forward or to decide that there is no further action, dependent on what the evidence points to. And from that point, if you look at our schedule on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, our liaison for students and families for expulsion will reach out to the students and the families to talk about what the next steps may be, and work with the families as to whether or not they are going to perhaps agree to an alternative placement. They can stipulate to the expulsion. And we've really tried hard over the past couple of years to have a person in this position that is able to explain. So she is available by email, by phone. She also texts with the families as well. Depending on what is worked out with the families, we either move forward with a contract, or we parents are, as Attorney Gornall said, entitled to a hearing, which would move us forward to the next step of the process, which would be a referral for the hearing.
Ms. Zumagala, I just have a question, either for you or Attorney Gornall, but so the when it gets to the expulsion review committee, that's essentially when that's at the administrative level, and we generally and historically, as a board, leave it to the administration to determine and shape that, as we do pretty much all operations, et cetera. Does the board have the ability to say input as far as like what roles, and I'm guessing the CBA or something else also determines as far as like not specifically who by name, but as far as like roles, there should be an XYZ representative there. What does that look like?
For the committee to
For the
review?
review committee,
Yes,
correct.
so the board would absolutely have input on what position should be part of that committee with review.
The only restriction, ironically, is that you can't put a board member on that committee.
Correct.
Because
You have to hear.
you're right. You ultimately are the arbiter of whether or not the student is expelled, so you have to retain that level of separation for due process reasons.
Thank you.
So the contract, what is a contract?
So the contract would be, there are times, perhaps if I will use the simplest one, if a first grade student brings in a toy squirt gun, we would not move forward with the expulsion process for that, so we do something called a behavior contract. That way we can connect with the parents and they understand that even though it's a toy, we want to leave those items at home. And we work closely to make sure that they have any supports that they need.
As far as the committee goes, currently, is it just administrators, like nobody from the outside, no community leaders, just administration?
Correct, it's central administration, yes.
Okay.
And finally, the last document I just included for your reference, I'm not going to go over it. It takes the.
Ms.
per-
Zumagala?
Yes.
Attorney Wachter reminded me that we just wanted, having somebody from the community on that committee would be problematic just for federal confidentiality reasons of the students that we're talking about, unless they would waive that right specifically to allow a non-school district person to be part of that.
And we could iron that out
Yeah,
in,
we can-
in any future work that.
We would have to talk about how that would look.
Mm-hmm.
They would have to be like an appointee of the school district or something. It would take some steps if we would allow somebody who's not an actual employee or agent of the school district to be on that committee looking at confidential student information.
Okay, well, we can make note of that as we move forward with any adjustments to the procedure or process. And the last document, the expulsion referral procedure, it is essentially that workflow document in greater detail. I did provide this to the board so they can see the steps that the administration takes to provide support to the families throughout this entire process. So really, it's this workflow document with description. So I won't go over that. It's just a deeper explanation into the workflow document.
I have a question. You can expel somebody for a year, but it's not like they're out the door. They then go into alternative education, and I'm sure there's an increased supervision of the child during that period of time.
That's correct. We most of the time put the students into one of our alternative placements that we have with Sarah Reed. It depends on the situation. We try and find the best placement where they do receive their academics, but they also receive counseling and other supportive services. So that would all kind of be under our umbrella as well.
So we contract out for the alternative education, we don't offer it ourselves.
That's correct. That's correct. It's PDE approved.
And Mr. Nichols, that's something that we can send the board, a breakdown of all our alternative programs and the different supports that are provided by them.
Oh, yeah, Ms. Graff, I'm sorry.
So, in this document that Ms. Cornell went over, that number 4C says, many school districts place students in alternative education programs in the period of time between initial suspension and the conclusion of the expulsion process. Erie Public Schools is unable to do this because of the Jordan Order. So is this, we're talking about something not this. We're talking about what you were just mentioning with alternative is not what's referenced here. It's something different.
Should
Right,
just talk about
the Jordan order pertains to the removal of students prior to an expulsion process. So what was occurring before was that students were, when I say before, I mean
In
the 60s,
Yeah,
was that students were being moved out of classrooms
right.
prior to any due process being provided.
No, I know, but it says between initial suspension and the conclusion of the expulsion process.
So
But-
meaning the hearing, the conclusion of the hearing,
Oh, okay.
Board
Well,
Not-
because that process
and the board
is
approval.
their whole time, I would think.
We
So
review the
expulsion
process as being through the board approval, and then after that, they're in their
Okay,
alternative education
all right,
period.
thank you.
This question, regarding like the due process. So if, when the student is referred for expulsion, so what is their process of like getting services, like somebody to represent?
The notices that are sent to them encourage them to go out and obtain counsel if they wish. I believe it makes reference to
it gives
Northwest
them
Legal
that-
Services. And we've had times when counsel from Northwest Legal Services have come in and represented the student that has been involved. The school district does not provide individualized counsel for each one of those students. The school district does have a hearing an attorney that is hired that represents the hearing committee. Attorney Tony Logue has been doing it for a very long time. He's a defense counsel in town. And Attorney Logue is there for the purpose of ensuring that the process is followed, that all of the necessary due process has been met, and to ensure that the students and their families have every opportunity to participate to the extent that they're permitted to do so. But beyond that, the school district doesn't provide any specific representation in the matter.
So for example, if a parent or family cannot afford somebody to represent them, and often Northwest Legal Services backed up, then they have no service, so the students are coming in there without due process because they don't have no representation.
That's not true. So due process is the process that needs to be followed to ensure that they're aware of their rights, to ensure that we are respecting their rights. They have a right to bring counsel in on their behalf or another advocate if they so wish. But their failure to do so is not a violation of due process. That's just their inability to arrange for somebody to arrive on their behalf.
And we do work with the families. I mean, a lot of times, we haven't had that many hearings the past couple of years, but when or if they do get Northwest Legal Services, and sometimes Northwest Legal Services, like you said, Zach, it is backed up, and they'll say that the day of the hearing, we can't make it, we need to reschedule it, and that we have never once said, we've always accommodated that and ensured that the students are receiving educational services in that interim time period when or if there's a delay.
Is there any boundaries or anything that would prevent the district from providing, other than the financial cost? Is there any other boundaries or considerations if, let's say, perfect world, do other school districts cover those costs at all? Is that something that's done at all?
I've never heard of that,
I've
no.
never heard of it.
Okay. Just curious. Okay.
Sorry. If there are any other, getting used to it, any other questions? Okay.
I do want to note, this is just to start the conversation. I will be taking notes. If you want to email me, text me, call me, speak to me after the meeting about what you would like to include in the draft of the statement of philosophy, basically what you think the goals or the guardrails, what we would hope to see and hope not to see in the expulsion process, might be a better way of saying it. Do let me know, and I'll be sharing that draft prior to our committee of the whole meeting next month, so that you have time to review and consider that as well. So, any other questions for?
I do have one.
Yeah, go ahead,
Attorney
Ms.
Gordon, when you said suspension is to be 10 days, can it be less than 10 days?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Ms. Gwen, any others? Okay, thank you very much. All right. That takes us to something I was actually really excited to see, the science curriculum. Ms. Ryan?
Good evening. I'm pretty excited about this too. Tonight I have a team with us to share with you our recommendation for the new K-8 science curriculum materials. We're still working through the process with high school, so that's pending. But tonight the team will share with you the process that the committee executed to reach the decision. And they're going to share the curriculum materials recommendation with you. So I would like to introduce two members of my team that took the lead on this process, Miss Melanie Miller and Dr. Rick Schneider. And they have along with them two of the teachers from the committee, Mr. Adam Boakes and Mrs. Jennifer Baker. We had a fabulous team of dedicated educators that met extensively. So I'm excited for you to hear about the process they went through in order to bring this recommendation to you.
So excited to be here tonight. I feel like we've been doing a lot of really great work, and so it's fun to now be at this point and be able to talk with all of you. This whole process kind of started, where do I point this? Oh, there we go. This whole process really started back at the very beginning of 2022, if you can believe it. At that point in time, the state adopted new science standards, which are now going to be fully operational on both PSSA and Keystones in 2026. So that really kind of got the ball rolling in terms of providing a timeline for when we needed to really get this work accomplished. In summer of 2022, Rick Schneider and myself attended various professional learning sessions that were put on by the Pencil Network as well as our local IU. In winter of 2024, so just last year, we started and developed a curriculum committee that came together and started some really deep work. In summer, last summer, our team and the committee really engaged in some rigorous professional learning. So our committee, along with our administration, so they really became grounded in what excellent science teaching and learning should look like that's aligned to the shifts in the STEEL standards. This fall, the committee actually took all of that professional learning that they received over the summer and flipped it. And they provided that training to all of our teachers across the district, kindergarten through 12th grade. And now, here just in this past month or two, we've worked hard with the committee to look at some various vendors and work with them to determine what our next steps are in terms of moving forward with a curriculum adoption. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Boakes. He's going to speak a little bit about some of the shifts that we saw in the STEEL standards.
All right, so this obviously isn't coming out of nowhere. The Pennsylvania Department of Education has kind of transitioned their standards to what they call the STEEL standards, and that's an acronym: Science, Technology, Engineering, Environmental Literacy, and Sustainability. So they're kind of shifting the focus of our science education in Pennsylvania. And that comes with a shift in teaching style and learning style into a more three-dimensional, I think we can all imagine what a one-dimensional teaching style is, into a more three-dimensional dynamic classroom, which comes with phenomena-based, inquiry-based stuff that we've kind of been hearing about and very well-researched instructional models that come with this, like the 5E instructional model, and really focusing on science and engineering practices, getting our kids K-12 to do the things that scientists do and not just hear about the things that scientists do.
I am going to start off with a visual of a stool with 3 legs. So the 3D is the 3 dimensions, and really, without all 3 of them, it could tip over. And we want this new dramatic kind of huge change in our science curriculums and in our classrooms for the student experience. So we start off with engineering practices, and maybe when you were in school, you learned about the scientific inquiry or the scientific method, which those core points are still there, but it's really focusing now on design and how science applies to students' everyday lives.
I was envisioning it just fine, by the way.
There we go. We have a visual for real. We also have cross-cutting concepts. And what that means is that these thoughts and ideas apply to all sciences, whether it's chemistry, biology, and every level. These are things that students might see with patterns, cause and effect, and things like that. Finally, then it comes down to those core disciplinary ideas. And so what makes it core? Well, we don't want something that's a mile wide and an inch deep. We want things that apply to many ages at differing levels. So that's one important thing. They provide key tools for our students that they're going to use throughout their life. They relate to student interests, and if the student isn't interested in it per se, it is a very kind of necessary, it connects to those societal concerns. And finally, it has to be teachable and learnable across, the different levels. So that's what makes it 3-dimensional.
So we say phenomena-based and inquiry instruction. So talk about a visual. Here's a visual. So what this might look like in the classroom, and as I've been learning, I've been kind of messing with this in my own classroom. So what that would look like is showing your students a picture or a video like this and posing a question to them. Well, when we see volcanoes erupting, it's almost always accompanied by lightning strikes. Why? And then you leave it at that.
I like to think of it kind of like the mic drop, the little,
a little dangle it, the carrot in front of them, they start coming up with a lot of questions. And so you start capturing that as a classroom. You do not start answering those questions immediately. Once again, we take them through this cycle of the 5E instructional model. Now, this is not linear. That's why it's shown in a circle. During a unit and each lesson, you might see parts of the 5E model. You might see 2, 3 of them. You might see evaluation happening more than once. And that's because we want to engage them with those kind of very interesting, big kind of catches, those hooks with the phenomena. And you start exploring with them. You start doing hands-on activities, and this is why we like the proposed curriculum so much. The curriculum provides kind of these packets and these bins and these Ziploc bags that are easy. They are being able to replicate for multiple sessions in different classes. And then the teacher, of course, still has a role to explain. As Dr. Brenneman said, those guide rails to kind of keep them focused and not get too off topic. And then students get to elaborate. They start to apply these new things that they've learned to new situations, that true learning. And that evaluation process isn't just a test. They have science notebooks and journals, and it can be through questioning, and it can be through demonstrations that the students put on as well.
And then the last thing that we kind of wanted to share with you was the vision that the committee had put together. And we spent some time thinking about what we wanted science education to look like in Erie's Public Schools moving forward. And so I would just read it. All learners engage in student-driven scientific exploration, thinking, and communication connected to real-world application. And that's the thing. This phenomena stuff really opens the door for us to show the students stuff that's happening in our Great Lake watershed here and stuff that's happening that they can see and touch in their everyday life. And we just thought that exploration, thinking, and that communication part in reading and writing and really saying what they're thinking was really important, and wanted to instill for you guys the trust that we took that into heavy consideration in our materials vetting.
So before I hand it over to Dr. Schneider, I won't read this slide to you, but I'm definitely going to make note of the first bullet there, built for equity and inclusiveness. This is a lens that I like to take. I am very aware of my embodiment, but I am very intentional about looking of how things are equitable for all students and abilities, and how all students can be included in these scientific ideas. So this curriculum that we're proposing, Activate Learning, first off is proactive about featuring people of different ethnicities, and they are included in the images and videos that they provide in their curriculum. So that to me was very important. They also have many ways to show what you know through the lens of the student perspective. For students that writing or speaking, that they might have difficulty, if they are special education, or even on the other end, we're trying to extend their thinking, they're able to do voice to text. They are allowed to put in photographs that they've taken, and they are able to do speech to text. And on top of that, since we have a very large English learner population, it is already translated into 128 languages. Plus, they are still adding to that number right now. Even their website, I think, says higher than that. But that's without the use of Google Translate. So these are tools that students could speak Arabic into their Chromebook and translate it into English, and there's that immediate ability. So that was very important to us. Of course, then for our students that might be homebound or truant, or on vacation or not able to attend in-person school, everything is digital as well, but there is the use of consumable textbooks also. So there's that kind of ability to be adaptable for what the student needs.
So I could spend some time going through all the bullets. There certainly are a lot more bullets that we could talk about with the curriculum, but I won't do that. What I will do is just summarize all of this by saying a couple of quick things. OpenSciEd developed the curriculum, and it's used by a number of different vendors, and they've all been jumping in and trying to take it and make it something that they can go out and get districts to buy. They built a solid curriculum. Activate Learning took it and made it more user-friendly, opened up access to a lot more students, and made the curriculum more usable for our teachers, our students, and for our families. In the long run, Activate Learning took a great product and made it even better, and that's why I think the committee really jumped in and is endorsing it. And they're very excited about the potential to come in and truly change the face of what science teaching looks like in Erie's public schools. So Karen has one last piece that she's going to talk to you about, and thank you very much.
So on your board agenda, you'll notice that there is a quote. The quote that's on this month's agenda is for our middle school materials. As you're looking at that quote, it is a 3-year quote, and what's included in that three-year-old quote is all of the teacher resources that are not consumable, along with 3 years of student consumable materials, and also the science kits, which students will use to do their experiments and their explorations. So we just wanted you to understand what was included in that quote. Do you have any questions for me or for the team?
This is an enhancement of our existing, or is this all new?
This will be new. We haven't had a science curriculum replenishment since the GE grant, so it's been a pretty long time.
How long ago was that?
25 years.
I'm looking
20.
I'm looking around 20
20.
plus years.
Wow.
Well, it was,
I'm impressed the staff's been
I
able
was still
to
working.
yeah.
I
perform
retired in
because
2011.
when I see the test scores, science, we do better in science than other areas, so thank you.
And we think that this is going to provide resources for our teachers that are just exceptional, along with the shift of the state standards. So it's all lining up in a really great way.
I need to know why there's lightning when a volcano erupts, because I don't know.
I'll tell you what, with that phenomenon, is that one of the units will have to invite Mr. Nichols to be a part of that class. Yes, we are very excited because the goal is that in middle school and elementary school, they will begin to, I don't want to say pilot, but they're going to begin to utilize these units. In the second semester, middle school will start right away. Elementary will be a little bit behind them. So that teachers are getting the professional learning. They're applying the professional learning of what they learned all fall with these new materials. And that way, next year when we're really up and running, they will have had some experience with the materials. And it will just make, I think, implementation so much more smooth for our teachers and for our administrators.
I haven't found the quote, so what
Brian's gonna.
Yes, I'm sorry, we should have had that number for you. It's actually item 7.21 on the agenda. The 3-year quote is $865,000. So that's, a third of that is what it's going to be for each year. And for curriculum, I'm not up to date on the latest number. How much is it?
This year's was 1.5.
1.5 million we have in the budget for curriculum. And I also want to point out, as they mentioned, this was up for replacement a couple years ago. It was one of the last items in our cycle. Once we go through this science curriculum, we will have refreshed every curricular area, and we'll begin reviewing math and ELA probably next year.
I just want to point out this is what
Not
happened.
together.
Yeah, right. At the
Not
same time.
together ever again.
I do want to point out this is what we get when we invest in education, right? I mean, we're looking at decades and there's teachers that have spent their entire career haven't been able to use new curriculum, which is really unfortunate. And all the children that have been robbed of these experiences over these years. And so when we talk to taxpayers as far as the property taxes paid, when we talk about the funding and the fact that we're still $90-some million short of fair funding, these are the things that we can invest in. I do want to ask one quick thing, whether it's you, Ms. Ryan, or Ms. Zumagala, just for the board and everybody's awareness, like when this is adopted, what does that look like in the buildings, et cetera, as far as managing and implementing the curriculum?
Sure. So I think we've learned a lot of lessons about curriculum implementation since we've been in our roles. This has already started. What's different about this than many of the other curriculum adoptions that have happened is we started first educating our committee, and then our committee, all of our teachers, on what good science teaching is supposed to look like, so that they were grounded in that before they started to vision, and then before they started to look at materials. So everyone, teachers and administrators, have all been trained up through, I think the last training was in November, about what great science teaching is supposed to look like. Now that they know what it's supposed to look like, we didn't go and look at materials and say, oh, what materials look nice first. We said, what's great science teaching supposed to look like? What's our vision for science supposed to look like? And then we reviewed materials based on our special considerations, things that our teachers felt were important, along with what best research says. And that's how that kind of happened. From there, which is why we're kind of excited about the rollout, the teachers will get to be trained in a module. They'll implement, we'll check in with them, principals will walk, we'll support them, and kind of work through the process so that we can make sure that the teachers are supported through this process and are learning while they're doing, and kind of just continue to repeat. And then learning walks will continue to follow so that we make sure that things are being implemented as intended, but also that teachers are working collaboratively in their PLCs, talking together, planning together, sharing ideas so that the implementation goes quite smoothly.
I appreciate you mentioning that. I remember the visual that you had created at one point as far as the PLCs and the learning walks and all that. So that's great to know, and I think it's important that the public and parents, families know that the curriculum is alive and that teachers are continuing to evolve and grow. It's not just here it is. And
no, this is going to be a shift, and I think everyone's well aware of the shift of teacher as facilitator and students as scientists. Scientists don't watch and listen. Scientists, they learn, they do, they read, they write, they process, they collaborate. So we're pretty excited about this.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Ms. Graff.
I just have a comment. This makes me so happy. I'm just like giddy over here. I thank you and the committee for looking into this and the approach that you took and the mindset. And I think this is going to be great. So thank you very much.
It is really exciting. It's really exciting. And our committee, I can't speak to the professionalism and the dedication that they've had. They put in a lot of work, learning to facilitate, then training to facilitate, doing that facilitation, and they have been just rock
We can tell
stars.
it's a real commitment and
They have been
passion
wonderful.
for it. So thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
I just want
I'm
to say
sorry,
thank
Ms.
you. No, it's okay. Go ahead. I just want to say thank you because I did hear you say diversity. And that's something that has to be inclusive because you can't have science without diversity. And to include that, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. No? Okay. All right. Thanks. That moves us on to item 3.01, which is our facilities plan, phase 2. We have the architects, engineers to guide us through that. There's also a booklet.
Good evening, everyone. Great to see you all again. Happy New Year to all of you. My name is John Finham with HHSDR. It's great to see all of you again. I'm also going to invite Jim Vizzini up too to talk about some heating, plumbing, electrical. But we're here tonight to discuss transitioning into what we call the Phase 2 projects of the renovations. So we have been working diligently to get through all our Phase 1 projects, including Erie High School, Collegiate Academy. Now Edison is going up. And as we round the corner on completing that, we're now looking to the next phase, the Phase 2 projects. And tonight we'll just go ahead and kind of walk through this agenda really quick. And it's up on the board as well as in this handout on page 2. We'll just kind of review the Phase 2 facility updates, what we mean by that, and then also what we discussed here at the April 2023 board meeting, just to kind of rehash where that is. Touch base real briefly on the Grover Cleveland Strong Vincent electrical switchgear, and then talk to you tonight about Grover Cleveland Elementary School and then Strong Vincent Middle School. And then also be here for any discussion or questions that you may have this evening. So the Phase 2 facility updates, just kind of the methodology and process. Now we've kind of touched on it briefly. We've gone through the Phase 1 updates. We've pushed through those rather aggressively to get those done. And then back in April of 2023, we took a snapshot of where we were at that point in time to understand what still needed to take place. There's still a great deal of work to be done across the district, and we're trying to keep that out in our crosshairs and keep it in front of us. We discussed this with the administrative team, and due to existing conditions and just the overall need, the two schools that are kind of rising to the top that are in need of renovation next, we've kind of pulled out Grover Cleveland and Strong Vincent Middle School to receive the first renovations of the Phase 2 development here. Just as a note, Phase 1, the process and the idea and methodology was definitely warm, safe, and dry. We want to keep that as the goal moving forward into Phase 2. We are going to transition and be able to accomplish some more things in Phase 2 with our development. Now that we got all the emergencies done, I'll say, we're going to take some time, talk with the administrators and teachers and staff as a part of each planning process to make sure that all of their thoughts are being incorporated as well. The next page here on number 4, this is what we presented to you in April of 2023. This highlighted in 2023 dollars the costs for the school and what we listed as the priority. As you can see here, we have Phase 2A, first priority. It's the highlighted area at the top, where we have Strong Vincent and Grover Cleveland Elementary School. This is just to kind of rehash that, we went through the remaining scopes of work and looked at everything and then brought that to the table to say this is where we feel the roadmap is going to go from that point in time. Moving into the next slide here, yes, ma'am, please go ahead, Ms. Scruggs.
On page 4, the above costs exclude asbestos abatement. So
Yes.
if you're doing something at the school and you encounter, and it requires you to encounter a space
Yes,
where you
ma'am.
have to deal with asbestos, you have to deal with it, right?
Yes.
So the abatement means you're not going in and removing it if it's there and it's not being disturbed. Is that what that means?
So before we would develop a project, we would definitely go get an asbestos report to analyze all of the asbestos within a school, if there is any at all.
Right.
And it would be planned into the overall construction. So for Grover
Construction
Cleveland,
for that piece or for the whole school?
The part that is being worked on,
Yep.
the asbestos report will identify where the asbestos is, and the
Yes.
asbestos will be removed or
That's-
abated. They are synonyms in
Where
this
it's being
regard.
worked on.
Where it's
but
being
not
worked
in
on.
the rest of the building if it's not being touched.
If we're not working on that part of the building, it would likely not be touched. Is that
Okay.
correct, Neil?
Yes, I will say that the way that these projects have been developed, there typically isn't a part of the building that we aren't touching.
Okay,
And so when we know where the asbestos is, we take out all the asbestos regardless of what's going on. I mean, at this point, we know how hazardous it is. We know what the concerns are overall.
right.
And again, with the nature of the work that is being accomplished in these buildings, if we've got somebody there, we might as well just take it out.
Okay, but the statement says the above costs exclude asbestos.
That is
abatement.
correct.
So these costs will be more.
Depending on the building, you are correct.
Okay,
It could be
all
more.
right, I just wanted to verify. So it's not that it won't be done, it's that the cost isn't captured here.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So on page number 5, just a brief stopping point before we get into the overall work. I'd like to talk about the electrical switchgear at both Strong Vincent and Grover Cleveland. The main electrical switchgear that for the buildings, both of them is very antiquated. So as we do these renovations, if we're looking at the possibility of new rooftop units or new HVAC, a new elevator at Grover Cleveland, we are going to need new electrical service. Historically speaking, the lead time to get that equipment to a site is anywhere between 40 and 52 weeks. Given that, we are actually going to accelerate the equipment bidding of both the electrical switchgear for both of those schools ahead of any development or bidding out of the other 2 projects, so that we can ensure that we have the equipment there in time for the renovations to take place, and then we can also power up those new renovations as they're completed.
John,
Yes,
can you
please.
just quickly explain what electrical switchgear means?
Thank you.
Go ahead, yeah.
I was gonna ask, but I figured everybody else knew what it was.
The simple explanation, if you go, your power company brings power to the building. It has to show up in one consolidated location in the building. So you'll have high voltage 3-phase power that comes in at, say, 2,000 amps, 3,000 amp service. That service just doesn't magically go all through the building. The switch gear is a large box, large breakers, large distribution buses and whatnot. That's where all your power distribution to all the various panels. Your house might have 1 or 2 electrical panels, but some of these schools might have 30 or 40 because of their size and how large it is. So that's where all the electrical power is brought into the building and how it gets distributed out. And like John said, the lead times on that for the last 4 or 5 years have been problematic, to say the least. And we know enough about these buildings and what their proposed upgrades will be that we know how large those services will need to be. We're close. We'll work on the engineering and design of that. We can bid that early, get that priced, get it in production, and get that scheduled for shipping so it matches our construction schedules. Don't know if anybody was around here back in the days when East was built, but almost every large piece of equipment, gear, generator, rooftop units, air handling units, chillers, they were all done in that manner, just for any number of reasons. So that's what we have.
This is
How
just-
old are the switch gear that are in those buildings? Are they original
50 plus years.
Wow.
You have some of the heating system in Strong Grover Cleveland dates to 1955. So that's 70 years old.
So is this just the main big one, or is it the main big one and all the
It's
other
just the
ones?
main, it's
Okay.
where the service
But there
comes
probably
into the
will be other
building.
ones that have
Right.
to be upgraded as part of the
All the new panels in the building. Panels
Okay.
aren't a long lead time issue. Wiring's not an issue. The small breakers are. It's just the large switch gear.
Got it.
That's made specifically for a building for a service.
Thank you.
And the
Welcome.
panels and things like that are replaced within the renovation process.
Okay, got it.
So we want to have the main switch gear, the main component there, then to power the new panels as we're replacing them as we go.
Thank
So my apologies on that. So thank you, Neil. Appreciate that. So just to talk about those timelines really quickly then, on page 6. So we're looking, kind of a head nod this evening for the development of these 2 projects. We would begin development of the switchgear construction documents for Grover Cleveland and for Strong Vincent, as soon as tomorrow. I say that, but we'd get right on that. We'd look to start the development of also the design of both Grover Cleveland primarily right away. And so as we're developing that design, we'll kind of confirm the loads of the electrical system and what we need. We would bid that out here in May of 2025, award it this summer so that it would arrive next summer as we intend and plan to start our construction for Grover Cleveland. Strong Vincent is a similar timeline. We'd approach it in the same manner. The idea is that we would bid that out about a year before we intend to start the construction for Strong Vincent Middle School, which we'll take a look at those timelines here in the next few pages as we go here. Okay, now let's talk very briefly about Grover Cleveland Elementary School. This was one of the higher priority buildings. I just would like to discuss the scope of work with you all this evening. In general, the general construction, we're gonna look to take care of a lot of site work, just repaving site areas at the parking lot, as well as some walks. Take care of those on an as-needed basis. If they are in good condition, we will definitely be salvaging those and looking at ways to make that, as inexpensive as possible. Doors, hardware, and frames within the interior and exterior are all going to be investigated and reviewed. Make sure that they, if they need replacement, they will be replaced. There will be an accessibility upgrade for doors and hardware to make sure that we have accessibility into our spaces. The interior renovations are going to follow the HVAC for the most part. We are not reprogramming spaces. We're not allocating anything on the interior at this point. We are going to have a time where we can sit and talk with the teachers and the staff and the administrations to see if there are needs. But right now, the overall 30,000 views that we would just kind of follow the HVAC renovations. That would include new ceiling, paint, and new finishes, perhaps some new casework as needed, new floors and things of that nature. The roof is under warranty right now, and so we would have select roofing repairs if needed, but also we would want to salvage the warranty and make sure that anything that is penetrated through there is done so in a warranty-like manner so that we can keep that going.
John, I just want to interrupt for 1 second.
Please go ahead.
My very first board meeting here at the district, we had a group of Grover Cleveland parents show up because the roof was so bad that we had buckets in between the student seats catching the water in the classrooms, and we were able to cobble together a couple $100,000 to do that roof. So I just want to point out how far we have come in that time period that we're able to do this complete renovation for this building. It's just great.
That's actually a very remarkable thought, actually, to see how far the district has come. So we do have a need for an elevator. There is no elevator, so we need accessibility on the 3 levels of Grover Cleveland. So that's going to be a very, very big component to bring on early in the project too. And then you'll see here, construct new gymnasium addition. I'd like to talk about that a little bit further. Grover Cleveland in general does not have a gymnasium. It's shared with the cafeteria. The other facet of that is Grover Cleveland is very, I don't want to say congested, but all rooms are used. So for us to phase a renovation is going to be very, very problematic. The beauty of a gymnasium addition would allow us to construct that first in the project and not finish it as a gymnasium, but create temporary classrooms in that space. We could then have students over there while we renovate the rest of the building, and then cycle them through, and then at the end of that come through and create it to be a gymnasium addition. There are a few other schools, 3 other schools beyond Grover Cleveland that would have that, not have a gymnasium addition. That was Lincoln, Pfeiffer, Burley, and McKinley. So depending on that, this could be something that you could consider in the future if it is a need. Jim, if you don't mind, you want to talk through real briefly just HVAC plumbing?
I will, thanks, John. But the other thing with the gymnasium would be that if it's constructed and we can shift the students in there as temporary classroom space, that will save roughly the second summer of construction.
Yeah.
So almost a year worth of construction. And instead of spending money for an extra year's worth of general conditions, you'd actually have something tangible that you could hold on to for the next 50 years. Similar to what we've done in the other schools where we renovated, like Wilson or the high school, we're going to comprehensively upgrade your HVAC system to be a ducted air system, quieter, more efficient, better filtration, better air quality throughout the building. We'll be keeping the boilers. If you recall, 4 years ago, we did a rebuild on almost all of them and a couple new ones. So we'll take advantage of the good equipment you've spent good money on for years. In fact, when we get to Strong Vincent, either good or bad, I worked on that design of those boilers in 1995, 30 years ago. So I'm fortunate and honored to still work here, and also obviously getting old in the process. But I think we've done a good job for the district by putting things in here that have lasted a long time and will continue to last a long time. So the HVAC system upgraded, be much better, more efficient, quieter. Plumbing, all new fixtures, faucets, traps, sinks, things that go when we're going to renovate toilet rooms, obviously. Electrically, it's basically going to be an entirely new system, branch wiring, panels, lights, convert to LED light fixtures. It'll be much more efficient and controllable. So when we walk away from this job and you go through the schedule, August or September of 26, you'll have a building that, in theory, should not have to be touched for another 30 years or so.
So just some of the challenges that we were kind of looking at initially, just little to no space to relocate the kids. We kind of touched on that, the gymnasium, but also going back to asbestos, we do anticipate that there is going to be asbestos there. We're going to get a report and take a look at that and how that's going to have to come out of the building. But phasing that could be problematic too with how tight things are. So we are going to have to look at the overall construction timeline on how that could occur. So the next 2 pages, just to briefly walk through that and talk through those. This is just some preliminary ideas. We have not really gone through a zoning review or a code review on what this is going to be. So this is just kind of some spitballing some ideas on what this gymnasium addition could be. But the idea is that we would kind of erect it off to the right-hand side of the building there, right along 38th Street. We'd have to look at how access is granted to that and so forth and so on. But you can kind of see off to the right-hand side this idea of a new addition. Off to the back, you can see a very, very tiny little blue dot, which the green marker is not going to show up there. But the tiny addition off the back would represent the elevator. That is a kind of a paramount location at the end of a corridor that actually connects all 3 levels. So we think that's going to work very well at that location. As I said, we need that for the overall accessibility of the building. And then just from a floor plan standpoint, you can kind of see on our next page there, this gold represents that it's a renovated area. The gold areas are going to be areas that we go into looking for HVAC, new finishes, and the scope of work that we described. The blue area to the right would represent the new gymnasium addition. That's actually an identical gym to what we would put in over at Edison. So it's not anything too elaborate, but it is going to offer some considerable usable space for the school. And then you can see very off the back there our new elevator addition that does have the ability to connect all 3 floors at that location. So moving forward into our timeline, as I said, we're looking to start into the schematic design. That would be our next step. In that realm would be, starting here in the month of January, starting to lay that out, starting to look at the overall floor plan, doing some building surveys in February, but also starting to schedule and conduct some teacher and administrator interviews, sit down and kind of walk and talk through what their thoughts are for the building, and let them know what our scope of work is, but also get some feedback and input from them as to what was going to be applicable. That worked very well at Edison. We had some great input from the teachers there. We want to try and capture that as we move forward. We want to fast track through schematic design and design development, looking to land to start our construction documents here this summer. Because of that new addition potential, we will have a stormwater impact, so we'll have to look at the engineering overall and possibly an MPDS permit. So we're going to be eyeballing and trying to get around September to get our submittals in for MPDS permit to the Conservation District or the city for the stormwater, so we can have those reviews and approvals ahead of time. We'd be looking to try and complete construction documents and specs around October of 2025, right in that realm, so we could submit for code review with the intent of bidding and advertising for bid in December, and then starting and awarding bids in February of 2026. Now, there's a lot of approvals and things like that that would go into that beforehand, and then really, we'd like to start construction on the elevator and the gymnasium additions first, as soon as basically the ground thaws in 2026, and then hopefully have those ready to go in the fall, and so that we could then start to phase everything. But also, we would start to target things depending on how extensive it is. We have to look at the report. The summer of 2026, where there's no one there, if we can start our asbestos abatement and take over larger portions of the existing, so we can create containments across the entire existing building and do that in a manner where no one is in the building at that point. And then hopefully completing construction about December of 2027 after we start our phase construction with the new additions. So from a cost standpoint.
I have a question.
Yes, Mrs. Kraft, please.
How much of this timeline is predicated on this switchgear timeline?
So the switchgear timeline, we'd want to try to have the switchgear equipment on site for about the start of our about June of
But
'26.
that's not that's not,
It is,
dictating the schedule, or is it in some ways?
No, it fits
Yeah,
in this.
it
schedule
fits into the schedule,
If
yeah.
we bid it early like we
Okay,
suggest we do.
okay.
so with the arrival of the switchgear, we can power up the elevator and also the new gymnasium
Okay.
addition at that point. Oh, wrong, too far. So page 11, then the cost estimate where we feel we are right now with the overall costs on Grover Cleveland. From a general construction standpoint, about 8.2 million, that would cover the renovations and some site costs there. The gymnasium addition would be about a $4 million price tag. That is covering heating, plumbing, electrical on that as well. HVAC, about 3.8 million, plumbing, 600,000, and electrical construction, about 2.6 million. So about a $19.2 million project. Soft costs on top of that of about 21%. That includes fees and permits and contingencies and things of that nature. So right now, our projected cost for Grover Cleveland's about $23.3 million rather, for where we stand at this point in time. Now, as we go through this process and we learn more about the building, we will continually revise this. We'll continually look at it. If there's ways that we can be better stewards of this and value engineer some things, that is always something that we will keep in front of us to be the best stewards of the district's dollars we can. Mrs. Kraft,
And
please.
I'm sure you have a lot of experience doing this type of work.
Yes.
And you've run into this asbestos thing.
Yes.
What are we looking at as far as a range of potential cost? I mean, are we in the tens of millions? Are
No.
we in the fives of millions, in the several millions?
No. Go ahead.
Linda, Ms. Kraft, excuse me, if I can give my best guess based on everything that we've run into, I know that we will have behind the wall pipe insulation that is most likely hot. We also have to remove all of the floor tile that is in that building,
yes.
because that is what is asbestos containing.
Right.
The good news is that it's the floor tile itself and it's not the mastic underneath, which will actually cut a step, because now we don't have to bring in grinders to grind away that mastic to get rid of it.
Right.
Number of rooms that we have, I would anticipate that the abatement cost should come in under $500,000.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That
Yeah.
makes me
Thank you,
feel
Neil.
a little more secure about it. Thank you.
So then, just to move on and talk about Strong Vincent, which is the other big component. Strong Vincent is very, very similar to a couple of projects we've already done with Wilson Middle School, as well as Collegiate Academy. The vintage of the buildings, the style of the buildings, and the construction are very, very similar. So the updates for Strong Vincent are going to be very, very close in relationship to what those two buildings are. From a architectural, general construction standpoint, looking at the interior door frames, hardware, we'll be looking to upgrade or replace the existing elevator, depending on what can be updated as part of it. The natatorium does have some renovations that are needed, and we've looked at that. We'll take a look at those. The new ceilings, paint, and select flooring would follow the HVAC, similar to how we're going to do that at Grover Cleveland. The ADA standards for toilet rooms will be taken care of, and then we'll have also, again, select roofing repairs, because that roof is under warranty. So anything that does happen, we'll take care of in a warranted manner. HVAC,
Very similar to Wilson. I mean, they're almost carbon copy buildings, other than this one is significantly larger. But a couple nice things about this one, obviously, we're going to reuse the boilers. There were also some renovations done in the last 15 or so years with air handling units in the gymnasium, cafeteria, auditorium. We will be keeping those and just reconditioning them. So those are some areas where, like John mentioned, doing our best to be the good stewards of the district and the taxpayers' money. We're not arbitrarily and haphazardly throwing things away. We will reuse things that have life, and we can bring them back to a point where they will then be ready to go for the next 30 years. Plumbing, similar scope. There's some work, obviously, because you have a pool, with filtration piping and whatnot, and electrical. It's a significant electrical upgrade of all pieces and parts.
and just some of the challenges that we face at Strong Vincent. I mean, it's a very large building, and because of how we phase our way through this, and what you'll see on the drawings is actually just a proposed idea of how we would phase our way through. We would still need to sit and talk with the administration to see how many rooms are available for us to take over, and what kind of scheduling that looks like on their end, because it's very problematic. It's very difficult for them to have to move things around. So we want to try and work with them closely to make sure that we can get through this the best way. But also, summer breaks for this building are very paramount. There are a lot of public spaces that we can't just take throughout the school year, gymnasiums and auditoriums and things like that. So we have to try and accomplish that work over the summers, so we are expanding this timeline out a little bit further so that we can absorb that. So over the next couple of pages, and I won't spend too much time on this, just to explain it, this is a similar approach to what we did at both Collegiate Academy and Wilson. You can kind of see this is actually the second floor. This is the top floor. And depending on how our HVAC and mechanical system comes to be, we would start where we can get our equipment in there for our mechanicals first, and we would start to develop that phase 1 area. We would have our contractors take those areas over, and as we bring on new HVAC systems, we can turn those pieces over to the school. So we would work our way around a floor of a building and then onto the next floor down, where we extend the mechanicals down further and continue to work our way around. And as you can see, these red areas here representing summers, not necessarily summer 1, summer 2, summer 3, but summer area 1, summer area 2, summer area 3. Them being public spaces, we want to try and capture those within a summer break so that we don't take those away from the students during the school year. And then finally, our lower level, where we would kind of look to start from the top and walk our way out of the building there. That would be the overall goal. From a timeline, this is very similar to what we would have had at Collegiate and Wilson. Looking to start, we would actually kind of stagger this behind the start of Grover Cleveland, because we would not want to start, we would actually start this at the beginning of a summer break. So we would look in April to start having teacher interviews and things like that, and then kind of delay schematic design. We would complete late spring, early summer, be doing building surveys of the building over the summer, looking to start design development and complete design development this fall, and then begin our construction documents so that we could get that out to bid and complete by next spring, so that we could award it early summer and start summer of 26. So we would start Grover Cleveland in the spring of 26, pardon me, and then Strong Vincent, we're looking to start that in the summer of 26. So they are staggered, but it allows us to kind of control those two elements coming through. And then finally, for our costs for Strong Vincent, this being a much bigger building, general construction looking about $15.5 million. HVAC about 8.7, plumbing 1.4, electrical construction 8.5. There's a big electrical scope of work there. Construction total about 34.1 million, with the soft costs about 7.1, so about a $41.2 million project for that. And as stated before, each step of this development process will be analyzing the costs, making sure that we're keeping things out in front of us, good, bad, or indifferent. We want to make sure that we're being transparent with the administration and you, so that we can keep this out and control the costs in the long run. That is essentially everything there for the development of the next two. Any questions, any comments, or discussion at all? Mr. Harkins.
Air conditioning, is that factored in, or is there potential?
Air conditioning will be put through as an alternate bid, as we always have, and if dollars allow for it, then that is something that will be included, but that is something that will be an alternate bid.
Any other questions?
Will the switch gear, will it be bigger or smaller? You've got the LED lights, but maybe you need more than you did in 1930 as far as use.
What's interesting, Sumner, is in aggregate, old gear in old buildings that incandescent lights were very inefficient. Even though, over the course of years, more computer loads get put in there, air conditioning might get added, but the lights become far more, significantly more efficient than the way the buildings were laid out back in those days. So the gear, the amp service, like a Strong Vincent's probably going to be a 3,000 or 4,000 amp service. It might not be too different than its total electrical capacity as it sits today, even though we'd be adding the air conditioning load on it as an alternate bid, because that light power reduction is so significant. In the old, in the old days, 20, 30 years ago, if you were going to add air conditioning, it was almost a it's not happening as much. I haven't seen it at all, actually.
And whether we approved air conditioning at this point or not, the switchgear would be sized to
Here would be
accommodate
sized,
that, yeah.
assuming that at some
Keep
point,
that option open.
we don't ever put something in that wouldn't be there readily available if you didn't do it now, but you do it in the foreseeable future.
Any other questions? Right, thank you.
Thank you all so much for your time. Appreciate it.
You're not giddy about this part?
I do want to, so I realize we're just right about the 90-minute part, so I'm going to call a 5-minute recess. We won't take a recess between the regular public meeting and the executive session, so use this time wisely in effect. So we're at recess until another 5 minutes from now at 7:10. Take it away.
I just wanted to point out that at next week's meeting, we need to affirm the Act 1 resolution in preparation for our 25-26 budget process. So the resolution says we don't plan to raise taxes above the state mandated index, which is currently set at 6.1%. And for your edification, based on our projections, we do not anticipate a need to exceed this limit, so the resolution will basically resolve that. You'll find the resolution on the agenda under new business for next week's meeting. And that's basically it, unless there's any other questions.
I want to point out too that 6.1 is the base index. Ours, because of our poverty and some other factors, is 8.1. So that gives us a little more room, which we still won't need.
I have a couple of questions. The Trump going in, there's concern about the Department of Education and such. How reliant are we on federal funds? It's not as important, obviously, as the state or local.
I don't know if Brian has more insight than this, but
Yeah, we get a significant portion of funds from the federal government, but we really don't anticipate, even if he does eliminate the Department of Ed, that we won't continue to receive that funding, and it would just go directly to the state as a block grant.
Okay.
yeah, that's Trump's big push is block grants.
And
Yeah.
are we getting any idea of what, if there'd be another increase in that additional funding we received last year? Is there some schedule for that?
It's, the governor's address is the first week in February, so we'll get an initial indication at that point as to where he's heading, and then all the negotiations will start from there.
Because I assume the other districts that are benefiting like we are would be like Philadelphia. I mean, there's some important
Yes.
areas of the state
Yeah,
involved.
we'll continue to connect with those organizations that are taking the lead on advocacy and be part of it through this budget process.
But they haven't, I mean, they indicated that last year was an installment and such. But if they would give us some idea, we might be able to plan with that money, and that's the problem.
Yeah,
We have
the big issue is, again, that the state's budget deficit is in excess of $6 billion before they adopt any additional funding for school districts. And I believe last time I looked, that would take their deficit up to $4 billion, which is considerable. So I don't think it's likely we're going to continue to get the full amount, but it's something, again, we're going to have to keep reminding people that we need and keep advocating for, so that we do get some adjustments.
Any other questions? Okay, next we have the bond issue.
Yes, I just wanted to report out that the bond, 2024 bonds that you approved in November, we did have that sale on November 19th. The yield on that was 4.2%, which is a little better than what PFM projected. So based on that, over the life of the bonds, we're going to save about $1.3 million. So it was a real success for us, and we already have the money. Everything was closed on December 16th, and we're ready to go.
Any questions for Mr. Polito?
And does that bond enable us to fund this work we were talking about earlier?
Yes. Anyone else? Okay, great. That takes us to the Board Policy Review Committee, Ms. Amatangelo.
Thank you, Dr. Brenneman. So you guys will see that you have a report in front of you at your seat right now. The Policy Committee met for the first time this year on Monday, the 6th. We met at 1 o'clock, and we were here in the boardroom, 1910 Sassafras Street. I'm just going to take you down to the table real quick and go over that so you all know what I was trying to do. Obviously, column 1 is our policy number, then our policy names, the reason that we reviewed the policy, what the committee has recommended, and then what our actual vote count was, in case you're curious about that. The majority of the language, as always, is statutorily required or required by law. Most of these were minor revisions. If you are interested in or curious about what those were, we can answer those questions, but these policies are available on board docs if you want to review them. You can also contact the board secretary's office if you'd like a hard copy. But a couple things I did want to point out, if you look at 815.2, we are recommending that we table that per the administration's request. They're going to continue some work on that policy. And then back up at the top, our community school model policy, the majority of the committee is recommending it, but you'll notice that the vote count was 3-1. So there was some discussion around that policy, but this is still kind of where we ended up. The next policy committee meeting will be March 3rd. Again, 1:00 p.m. here at 1910 Sassafras Street. I don't have anything else, but if the Vice Chair, Mr. Sharif, wanted to say anything, and we welcome Zach to the committee this year also. Mr. Sharif, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, just one reason why with the community school model, I thought that some of the languages that was included in there saying that the community school model or United Way was the backbone of the school district. I kind of disagree with that. Some of the language in that policy, and also mentioned that I feel like this policy should wait until we for the next superintendent. Like, you know, we're going through a process and giving one organization exclusive right to our district. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't vote on it, and I thought it should wait.
Any other questions or comments? I just want to say, although I see a typo, but just messing with you because I mentioned it to her earlier. There was another typo, but I just want to say I absolutely love this report. This is fantastic. It's really easy to read, I think, and has all the pertinent information. So this is great. Keep up the good work, Policy Committee. Next, because Ms. Devlin was excused for this meeting, we have the.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I too want to thank Ms. Amatangelo for this. This is exactly the way I like to see information presented. It's perfect. So thank you so much. So these will be up for vote at the next Wednesday's meeting, correct?
Yeah, generally, anytime there's a recommendation from a committee, it goes on the agenda for a vote, unless we were to decide here to go against the committee's recommendation. Okay. So they are on the agenda because it's presumed that because they were recommended by the committee that we would have it up for a vote.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. Next, because Ms. Devlin is excused for this meeting, she still was wonderful enough to provide a report for the Board Governance Committee. And I won't pretend to speak in her voice, but she says, I am pleased to report that our superintendent search application window closed on Sunday, January 5th, and that we received 20 completed applications for the position. Currently, our consultants are reviewing those applications and selecting the top applicants to move forward to the board for full review. The board will receive those top applicants as well as a link to the full set of applications this Friday, January 10th. Board members, which I believe everybody or almost everybody's already done, please remember to sign and return the confidentiality agreement that Angela has forwarded to Ms. Jones, has forwarded to all of us from the consultants. We cannot receive the applications for review until the consultants have signed agreements from every board member. And our next step is to meet with the consultants next week on Tuesday, January 14th, to discuss the applications and determine which applicants will move forward for first reviews. Thanks to everyone for the time you are putting in this process, and Ms. Devlin looks forward to reviewing the applications with all of us next week. And I can't really answer, I could try, I can't really answer too many questions, so.
Do we know a time for that meeting?
Yes, it's 3 to 7. Thanks, Mr.
3 to 7?
3 to 7.
How many are they gonna reduce it to?
We don't know. Whatever ones they determine have met our standards beforehand of meeting all the requirements of documentation and all the other things that we have. So if you recall, so that's a good question. So as you recall, they would give us their top recommendations, but all applications are still available for the board to view if we still wanted to.
Be it, someplace we can access them on Board
Yeah,
Docs?
and we'll have to figure that out on Tuesday. It won't be on Board Docs, but it would be. Okay. Next, we have myself here. So I if you recall at our board retreat, we,
I'm sorry, Dr.
Go ahead.
Brennan, can I, that work session, that is a closed meeting?
I
correct?
believe so
Or-
because no, but it's not at that point because we're not actually reviewing it's not considered because of personnel or?
Your board secretary and I had that conversation
Okay.
today, and
Thanks, good question, Ms. Graff.
based off the information that we had, we were under the understanding that a portion of it may be public when there was a review of the process, but that once we went into review of any of the applications or the recommendations, that would be an executive session.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Ms. Graff, and for the answer, Attorney Walker. Next, so at our retreat, we talked about establishing board goals or board priorities for the year, which Ms. Devlin, again, through the governance committee, had polled everybody and surveyed everybody, like what should be, and facilitated those discussions. And then we agreed upon a set of goals and priorities, and then we passed them by resolution. And then Mr. Polito was able to develop the administrative goals, which he does every year anyways, based on our own priorities and goals. At that time, I said that I would develop a proposal for us to implement our goals so that we can, and also to help us so that when it comes time to evaluate, we can say, or we can figure out how we met those goals. So this document that Ms. Jones was kind enough to print and provide for all of you. What I did, the first few pages, you'll find like the overview. I just put a nice simple, as far as like the table of contents, what you find, it is like 8 pages. The first couple pages is the resolution itself, in case you wanted to read again what we passed, in case you forget. Sometimes I forget what we passed. You can go back and look at these, what we resolved to do. And then you'll find the administrative goals after that, superintendent with the administrative, that's based on that. I added, if you want to get super nerdy, I added to what Mr. Polito had already did and showed what goals they align to. I just put numbers on the left-hand column so that when we refer to my plan here, you can see which board priority goals and which administrative goals that they align with. So I was trying to show as much alignment as possible if you want to get nerdy again. When you get to page 5, which is section 4, again, this is a proposal. This is voluntary. You don't have to do it. You can tell me to go pound sand or whatever the terminology is. But I have already had conversations with a number of you already, but I developed this based on what our priority goals were and in conversation with Mr. Polito about the administrative goals. And based on your own interests, strong areas, expertise, etc. And again, we can tweak these oversight topics if you feel it's not a good fit for you. I'm happy to work with you to try to find it as a good fit. But my concept here, and again, talking with Mr. Polito, is to develop a lead, a board lead. Basically, all of us would become experts the go-to experts on any of these given areas surrounding our own goals. This isn't a new committee. It's not additional committee work or anything like this. How much time and effort you put into it is totally up to you. And if you do it, it's totally up to you as well. So you'll find on page 5 and 6 that outlines those areas that relate to our goals. And I sort of have them thematically by focus areas. So you'll see family and student climate, because our goal is to improve school climate. So we have the family and student climate, conduct and engagement. So, Ms. Amatangelo, Mr. Sharif, and Ms. Graff, those areas, again, we can tweak those. I also show where those areas, which goals, both administrative and student and board goals, that they align with. Ms. Gwen is not here today, but she is already leading the committee for employee legacy and longevity, so that already fits in well. It also helps figure out for the administration and for us who from the administration would essentially you'd end up interfacing with the most. So that way we take the confusion out of that. Lauren, maybe I did speak with you on we texted or something like that. As far as employee welcoming and growth, I think you're a good solid fit for that. And there's been talks about how do we make it for new teachers and new staff members, how do we make the environment supportive and great with work that's already happening within administration, but how do we as a board monitor it? And also, a chance to give feedback to help. School pride and legacy. John, since he's already, and Mr. Harkins, you're already heading up that one committee on reviewing the name, possible name change with Harding and Boyd. So because you seem to, for no reason at all, seem to know everything about everybody with the history. And then Sumner, since you've been a fierce advocate for athletics, et cetera, there. And Ms. Devlin continuing to do her work as far as leadership and transition. And her and I are really, particularly me, are really catch-all. Everything that's not, because there are a few areas that's not covered by everybody's focus areas. So I basically would pick up all of that. And also, as I'm working with the administration with student voice, because student voice is a big part of climate. And I may end up interfacing with a couple of you as well. But with that, and I've already met with Mr. Polito and Ms. Umagala about putting forth a proposal for student representation at the board, and that will entail conversations with student councils, et cetera. And so that'll be a process. Hopefully, maybe next year we get that. To make this a useful tool, if you go to page 7 and 8, on the left column, that's essentially what you can do with this, okay? And on the right-hand side, the right column, that's what the administration could do with this. So on the left-hand side, we're talking about quarterly reports. Mr. Polito said that he could provide and have his team provide reports on these areas quarterly, and that you as the board lead would be provided with basically notice ahead of time and be able to, if you want to, you can talk with the administration about the report before we're briefed about it. So that way, when we get it, instead of, for instance, if this is one of your passion areas, instead of you having the most questions at the board meeting, you may end up actually having the most answers and able to emphasize what we should be understanding. And that'll help all of us grow and when it comes time to evaluation. Data requests, just, agreement, this falls in line with our board rules, et cetera, and practices that we've been doing, to basically timing, et cetera, but you can request data. Pretty much anybody, again, we can request data. Board reports, this would be if and when, which if you look at the calendar, I'll get to in a minute, but board reports, it's if the administration is presenting to the board on this issue, then again, they'll be worked with and collaborate with you ahead of time. And the last part, this I think is what we always struggle with, and really any organization struggles with. We get to the board self-evaluation, and we get to the superintendent and assistant superintendent's evaluations, and we're like, geez, what did we do? What did they do? I didn't write all that down. I remember what happened, right? This way, we will be able to use all this information we have, and when we meet and do the evaluations together, we can have these conversations, and each of you as experts in your own area will be able to help us figure that out as we're talking about. Now, of course, you're still completing those independently and privately and anonymously, but hopefully this process also enables a more robust evaluation process, so we're not, sort of scrambling in the dark. So that's really that. Are there any questions around my proposal on this? Again, feel free to email, text, call me. I'm happy to adjust it along the way. Again, if you have any questions about interfacing with the administration, just email Brian and I. He'll probably be the one to respond, but we'll go from there. So thank you all on that. I did want to notice, I'm sorry I sent like 3 massive emails recently, but that and Ms. Graff apparently really liked it, but this is the second year of me doing it, and Ms. Devlin had started it before I did, about a calendar that shows the topic areas for the year. Now, granted, there will be topics that will be added depending on what happens, but if you want to plan ahead, especially as a board lead around these focus areas, if you want to plan ahead and prepare for that meeting ahead of time, like, okay, we're going to talk about athletics at this time, we're going to talk about facilities at this other time. That way you can look at that calendar and say, okay, this is the topic that we're coming up with. And if we end up passing the board rules, that the future presidents will be bound to keep doing that practice if we end up passing the.
Jay, when would the first quarterly reports be due? Would it be like July 1st? Or?
That's a good question. We haven't figured that out.
Okay.
Yeah. It sounds like, what was it, June? What was it?
July
June 31st, July 1st.
No, we should probably.
Because Brian would be gone.
We should probably provide updates this year because these goals are for the 24, 25.
Correct.
Okay, so April 1st then?
Yeah, you think that would be enough time? And I think,
We'll talk about it as a team and get back to you.
you don't need to decide under the heat of the pressure right now, so. I do want to note that, and Ms. Devlin isn't here though, but I do want to point out that my goal is that, possibly because of the hire and everything else that we got to do, we also have to hire for the Secretary's office, which I'm going to bring up here within about a week or two, because we have to start the search for that, for those important roles. I forgot what I was going to say. It probably wasn't that important, so we'll just move on with life, and that'll be that. So, I know, board retreat. I'm initially thinking maybe the first weekend of June, depending. I know graduation may be around then, but again, not set in stone, just factoring because of everything that's going on in the spring. So, just put on your thoughts and feel free to get back on that. But any questions for me on that before we go on to the rest?
Jay, just
Mr. Harkins.
occurred to me thinking about it. I think we just would want to be mindful not to hamstring ourselves and not make a board member think that they couldn't bring up a topic that's so-and-so's the administration's primary responsibility as the ones to initiate problems, needs, and new proposals to us. Create a thing. There's, especially like a new board member, I've seen a lot of new board members say, well, am I allowed to bring this up, or how do I do this? And this sounds like it could, give them a headache.
Yeah,
It's not a criticism.
I'll clarify that. That's the conversation Brian and I had. That's exactly, everything you're saying is exactly what we talked about, but you're right. I did not, as you're saying it, I'm like, I did not spell that out. That's exactly, because also one of my goals this year is to help revamp the new board member orientation process. Thanks for calling me young.
Everybody's young compared to me.
Okay, so that takes us to the review of the draft agenda, which is before you. Feel free to take a glance, questions.
You know, anything we need to know that's interesting about the change orders?
No, the one for the windows is a time extension. We've had delay after delay after delay in getting the materials from the contractors, so that's all that is. The one for this building was selected work that needed to be done downstairs in the special ed file room. Thomas Construction is about rebuilding 2 staircases that lead from the pool down into the weight room area, and then the ones for Nuco were added work that needed to be done on T&M for issues that we found with the fire alarm and some door hardware wiring. Nothing outrageous.
Where is the pool status?
The pool is up and running. It's got water in it. Kids have been using it for practice. They'll be pouring the ramp that leads you from the new entrance down to that area this week. After that, they are building the new bleachers that are in the pool, and then really it's just finishing up the ceramic tile. And we're pretty close.
And just the floor is open for anybody if you have questions about the items on the agenda.
To any other matter? Is that where we
Are we, yeah, if we're good with the draft agenda, okay. And now, yeah, I just moved my papers all around. So yeah, I'm taking it that Ms. Graff, that you have
I do have
items
a
under,
question.
go ahead, go for it.
I'm just wondering about the rollout of the backpacks, how that went, if it's complete, and what,
It is not 100% complete. We are missing some for, I believe Erie High is missing, some shipments. Collegiate Academy, I believe, is missing 50. Unfortunately, last Friday, we were notified that a shipment of 300 was, for both of those buildings, was being canceled. So, I cannot speak enough about our purchasing department, for getting out and finding replacements. We found that some of the ones that were handed out to the elementary students were defective, and so we are working through what we can do as far as replacing those. But all in all, I'm very happy with the rollout. I've heard, good things. I mean, obviously the bags that break because they're defective, those are the things that come to my attention. But overall, the buildings did a very nice job in distributing them out, and really, I've heard no other complaints.
So they have been adopted pretty well, and are they having the hope of getting the students into the building faster? I mean, does it seem like they're effective in that, or we don't have enough data to evaluate?
Do not have enough data to evaluate that.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to thank Mr. Brockman for entertaining all the screenshots and texts and images I sent him, particularly about the elementary. And I did, because even though my daughter had her own bag that we had purchased for her, she did bring home one of those spare ones, and I noticed that the strap wasn't working too well on it. But I did have my oldest son put 17 pounds worth of books inside of it, and I jolted it around and all that, and it held up pretty well, but knowing that there were a number that were defective. And so I appreciate Mr. Brockman, of course, the administration, for getting to the buildings and making sure that we rectify, ensure that we are able to give a quality bag for everybody, which again, they're able to get their own as well. Any other matters? Anybody else? Mr. Harkins.
Neil, briefly, Edison, what's the status? How is it?
We're ahead of schedule with certain aspects of the build. We're behind schedule on certain aspects of the build. The original progress schedule that was given to me by the lead contractor at Perry had it very well in a sequential order where we would basically kind of move around the building. Because of the weather and everything else, back in the summer, he started jumping around. So when I say we're ahead in certain areas and behind in others, we are ahead of schedule when it comes to pouring foundations. Basically, 90% of every piece of concrete foundation that building is going to have is in the ground right now, which is ahead of schedule. But then on the flip side, because of that, they've had a little bit of a delay as far as enclosing areas to get them finished. So I've asked for an updated progress schedule. I'm still pushing for an 8/8/25 completion date because that's when it needs to be ready in order to get the kids in for the start of next school year. I'd be willing to give anybody a tour. The only thing I would say is bring mud boots.
Anybody else? Any other? Okay, that will conclude the public portion of this meeting. Next, we'll be moving into executive session for legal and personnel matters. So thank you, everybody. So allow for like a 2 or 3 minute reset.
Legal, personnel, and safety and security.
Executive session for legal, personnel, and physical security.
Safety and
and
security.
security.
Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney.